Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Mary Mendenhall. I'm a professor in the International and Comparative Education program at Teachers College, Columbia University in New York City. I'm also a member of the Teachers in Crisis Context Collaborative, what we fondly call the TIC, which functions under the auspices of INEE. The TIC is an interagency initiative that aims to develop open source and easily accessible guidance, tools, and resources to help all of us better support teachers through more robust, high quality, and continuous professional development opportunities. We'll share more details about the TIC and its tools in a few moments. But today we're thrilled to share more information with you about a new peer coaching pack, which extends support to teachers and thinks about ways to leverage peer and other types of support that is incredibly valuable for all teachers, but especially those working amidst various types of crisis-affected and other settings. So today I'm joined by my colleagues, Charlotte Bergen, who is an education advisor for global programs at Save the Children, and is a current co-chair of the TIC Collaborative. Next, we'll have Danny Falk, who led the capacity building work with teachers involved with our Teachers for Teachers initiative that we actually designed and implemented through Teachers College, Columbia University, in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. Teachers for Teachers combined teacher training, peer coaching, and mobile mentoring to support the refugee and national teachers there. I should also mention in full transparency that Charlotte Bergen also played a critical role in the development of the Teachers for Teachers initiative, which we very much developed in tandem with the work of the TIC and the initial teacher training pack for teachers in crisis context, and now the peer coaching pack that we'll share more about today. And last but not least, we have Mary Winters with us, who is the education coordinator for the International Rescue Committee in Iraq. So we have a great lineup of speakers to share this very important and very necessary tool to better support teachers. So Charlotte, Danny, and Mary will proceed now with their presentations, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. Please feel free to post your questions as we go in the comments box, but we'll refrain from answering those until we've gone through the first three presenters. So thanks again for joining us. Please keep your microphones on mute so we can avoid any background noise or interference. We'll look forward to engaging with you more during the Q&A. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Charlotte. So thanks again, and we'll catch up on the Q&A.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Mary, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. Hope you can hear me okay, but do let me know if there's any problems with the sound. Natalie, could we go to the next slide, please? Natalie, are you able to change the slides?
Sorry, everyone, technical difficulty. Just 1 second.
No, don't worry. We can get started. Okay. Well, while we're working through the slides, yeah, welcome to the launch of the peer coaching materials. We're really excited that these are now available for you all to use on the INE website, and we're excited to share a little bit more information about them today. So I'm really just going to give an overview of the materials and resources that are available, and then I'll hand over, as Mary said, to colleagues to talk more about what this is looking like in practice and how we can go about implementing the peer coaching approach. So I'm going to start just with a bit of background and the rationale for the peer coaching, and then a bit more of a deep dive into what these resources really look like and what's available for you to use. And then I'll end with some next steps for us as well. So I don't know if we're struggling with the PowerPoint, but never mind. We'll keep going, and hopefully it will catch up with us. So So hopefully everyone's familiar with TIC. As Mary mentioned, TIC was set up a few years ago now, really recognising that the incredibly challenging conditions in which teachers are working with in emergency responses, and a need for us as a sector to do much better in terms of the support we provide. All of the resources, the intention with these would be kind of drawing on our interagency expertise and resource, and all of the materials would be open source and available on the INE website. Please do feel free to explore the website, let us know if you have any questions, and please do always contact us if you need any further support or have any feedback. But the first priority area for the TIC was really around improving teacher professional development in crisis context. And that's looked like a few different pieces of work so far. So if we just skip to the next slide, thank you, Natalie. The sort of first piece of work was developing an interagency competency framework for teachers in crisis context. So having that agreed set of skills that we believed that we needed to support teachers to develop in these contexts. If we just go to the next slide, and hopefully this is familiar to many of you, the first initiative around that was to develop a training pack for teachers in crisis context that would then support the delivery of those different competency areas. So that involves a few different tools. There's introductory guidance, there's an initial training pack, and then more extended training pack, core modules, to really help us improve the quality of the teacher trainings that were being provided in emergency settings. This is being used now in lots of different contexts. There are French and Arabic versions available, and contextualized versions available as well in different contexts. And what's been exciting is it's often been implemented in an interagency approach. So through clusters, through working groups, and through colleagues coming together to really try and improve the quality of teacher professional development, and therefore the quality of teaching and learning happening in humanitarian and protracted crisis contexts. But for the TIC, this work around the training pack was really just the first step. We really recognised that if we were serious about quality and teacher professional development, we needed to look at the broader ideas of teacher support. And so that takes us to the next slide and the new materials and peer coaching. So we really recognise, as it says, the most promising teacher professional development programmes give teachers lots of different opportunities to learn new skills, learn new knowledge, and then lots of time to practice those techniques in their classrooms. In crisis contexts, where the teachers are often untrained or undertrained, when this support is really needed, it's often very lacking. And I think we're all too familiar with one-off workshops taking place without any follow-up or support. And so while it's great that there's been an effort to improve the quality of training workshops, these materials are all about providing that additional follow-up and support that teachers really need if we're serious about teacher change. The next slide, thanks, Natalie. So the resources they're open source, they're available on the INE website for you to use, and colleagues are already using them, which is fantastic. They were developed in an interagency way, just like the training materials. This was really driven by Mary Mendenhall and her students at Teachers College at Columbia University. And Danny, who's one of our panelists, really led that design work. So huge thanks to Danny. This was done in close collaboration with members of TIC, so senior education advisors from a range of agencies, all inputting in lots of different ways to the development of the pack. And it was piloted extensively in Kenya from Danny on the panel. What does it look like? It's a 2 or 3 day training for coaches, but then we also provide guidance around implementation and how to go about implementing this type of coaching model. And the idea is really about allowing teachers to continue their professional development and develop communities of practice outside of that training, so going beyond the training through very collaborative activities and collaborative work. Thanks, Natalie. Next slide. So why peer coaching? I mean, it may seem obvious, but I think it's just worth remembering the rationale behind this. So peer coaching complements more traditional teacher training, provides an additional layer of support to teachers, encouraging transfer of knowledge into practice in a few key ways. So firstly, it provides that ongoing opportunity for learning that we know is so key to changing teachers' practices. So one example of the research that suggests that without that support and follow-up, teachers only really implement around 2% of the new instructional methods, whereas with follow-up and support, that percentage increases to 85%. So this follow-up and support is really critical in terms of teacher change. But peer coaching is also a really important approach when we're thinking about creating supportive networks and opportunities for collaboration, which is so important in crisis contexts where teachers are so often overburdened and may feel very isolated and their well-being may be at risk. And so peer coaching shouldn't be an additional burden to those teachers, but it should be a means of creating a supportive network. And that was something that became very apparent in the pilot that I'm sure Danny will speak to shortly. And it's also around a space for professional dialogue. And again, thinking of crisis contexts where teachers' professional identities may feel at risk, may feel questioned if they're not being paid appropriately, if they're not being recognised as qualified teachers, if they're feeling inexperienced. Creating this community of practice also helps support teachers' sense of professional identity. So this is really the rationale. This is where the idea and the concept of peer coaching came from. So now let's have a think about what it actually looks like. So what do these new resources involve? So next slide, please, Natalie. So when you go on the website, you will find two major resources. So the first one is the Facilitator Guide. Now in the Facilitator Guide, you find lots of useful information. It provides a lot of the practicalities around how the peer coaching can work, the different skills that will be developed. It gives you all of the guidance for leading, for training peer coaches. So including lots of the training activities, tips for facilitators and so on, and then also guidance around implementing this type of approach. You will also find the Peer Coach Toolkit. Now this is a bit like a participant handbook in the sense that it includes all of the handouts that a coach going through the training would receive. But it's more than just the handouts. It also includes tools that the coaches can then go away and use as they're conducting their coaching with their teachers they're working with. So it's a really useful tool for the coaches. So we have the Facilitator Guide for yourselves, your colleagues who are leading the initiative, and then the Peer Coach Toolkit for the coaches themselves. And then, of course, the PowerPoint slides that support that coaching, the training for the coaching. Thanks, Natalie. Next slide. So just very quickly, what are the skills that we're developing through the training itself? The TIC came together and developed a competency framework for peer coaches as well. So it very much supports and builds on the teacher training competency framework, but this is specifically for peer coaches. And it's around three key areas. So peer coaches' roles and responsibilities, facilitation and adult learning, and subject content knowledge. And the competency framework is available also on the INE website. Thanks, Natalie. Next slide. So what does the training really look at? So this 2 or 3 day training for peer coaches, what does it cover? I'll quickly go through this, and then if colleagues have more detailed questions, I'm happy to follow up in the discussion. The training covers, firstly, it covers some really important soft skills for peer coaching. So it covers lots of interactive activities around supportive communication. So really exploring things around active listening, around reflective questioning, two-way communication, trust-building activities, and really allows the participants to practice and develop this type of communication, then use in their coaching. There was also a really strong emphasis on adult learning practices, and the coaches have responded really well to this, but really exploring how adults learn and how coaching can help support that, with really taking that focus that teachers need to be making meaning for themselves, and what is the role of the coach in supporting that process and helping teachers to be reflective practitioners. So lots of interesting activities around that. And then there's also the very practical content of the training, so it prepares coaches for the different roles and responsibilities they'll take on in this. There's a strong focus on goal setting, so how as a coach you can work with teachers to set goals, very much aligned with the teacher training that they'll have been through to support their ongoing development. There's also a really strong focus on teacher learning circles and how the coach can really play a role in making these effective as possible. And so this is a tool we know, TLCs or peer learning circles can be a really effective tool, and we really want to make sure we are providing enough support to make those as effective as they can be. So lots of opportunities for the coaches to practice that approach. And then there's an optional day on looking at classroom observations. And we know that classroom observations are often carried out as more of an evaluation, as more of a supervision. And so this looks at how we can use classroom observations in a really supportive way to support professional development. We know that that can be quite complex and quite challenging, so that third day is optional. So these are all of the types of things that you will see in the resources and that is covered during the peer coach training. And as I say, happy to answer more detailed questions in the discussion. Next slide, please, Natalie. So just to recap, you'll see we use these terms of different levels of peer coaching. Level 1 is just a 2-day training that really focuses on teacher learning circles, as well as all of the supportive communication techniques and the goal setting and so on. But really with teacher learning circles as the collaborative activity that coaches would then lead. And then we have the classroom observations, additional optional third day, which is described as the level 2 coaching, because we're really conscious that we need, in an EIE context, we need that flexibility in our response, and it may well depend on the capacity of our coaches. So that's very much up to you which approach that you would prefer to take. So that's why we have the 2-day option or the 3-day option. Next slide, thanks Natalie. And then you can see here what that looks like. So this is the agenda for the coach training. So day 1, you're covering issues around roles and responsibilities, supportive communication, TLCs. Day 2 looks at adult learning, practicing those TLCs, practicing setting goals. And it would only be on that optional day 3 that you would dive into classroom observations. So we've got plenty of time for the coaches to really practice what that means in a really supportive way. So this is the idea behind it. And so maybe just to say, sort of flag one really important thing. The idea of this approach is that it's non-hierarchical. So it's colleagues supporting each other. And we often get the question then, who are the coaches? And we have seen really great examples where this has been done very much peer-to-peer with teachers supporting teachers. And that's been a really effective model that has really fostered that support, that collaboration, and that network amongst teachers. So I think that's a really effective model. But these resources can be used with any coach profile. So the children, we've been using them with our own staff, so trying to help build up our staff skills to spend time in the classroom with teachers, fostering professional development. These resources have been really useful with our staff as well in terms of moving away from evaluation and looking at professional development. And similarly, colleagues have used these with teacher training colleges. It really can apply to any coach. It's more about the approach that's taken, of how we're coaching, again, moving away from supervision to support. I'm not going to go into too much detail on implementation, as I'm really conscious we've got 2 fantastic panelists who can talk more to the practicalities and the detail. But as well as the pack providing the coach training, it does provide guidance around how to go about implementing with various tools to support with that as well. Because we're really conscious as SIC that for some of our organisations that involves quite a change in the way of working. If for a long time one-off workshops have been the modality, and so really supporting us all as EIE actors to move more to this sustained model. Next slide, thanks Natalie. So I'll just close the next steps then. Firstly, next step in peer coaching. So priority of translations of the pack. It's available online now in English. The Arabic will be available very soon, and we hope to have the other translations available in the next few months as well. We are looking for more funding to support with that. So if anyone on the line is able to support, please do let us know. But we hope that will be underway very quickly, as we want this to be as accessible to everyone as possible. We'll then be looking to support implementation moving forward. So how can we best support you guys to pick up these resources and use these resources? And then we want to learn from you. So if you are using the peer coaching materials, what can we be learning from you about how that's going? What could be, what support we could give? What about the materials could be strengthened? Just very quickly in terms of what's next for TICC, there's a lot of work going on in the collaborative. So obviously still a real need to be providing more and better support to teachers, so the work is very much still underway. Just to give you a sense of what the work plan looks like, we're really, as I say, looking at how we can support organisations to move away from one-off workshops to more continuous models, really recognising the operational challenges of doing that. So we'll be looking at various guidance on that in the coming months. We're also doing a lot of work around meal tools, so look out for more resources coming soon, and developing a research and learning agenda. And we're also working with other colleagues in INE to look at this issue of teacher wellbeing, which has been a real gap, and I think there's a lot of momentum now with recognising we need to do better on that. And then we also want to keep learning from you about how you're finding the TICC resources, how we can make them better, and what other kinds of support you might need. And so that's my final request, is really that if you are using TICC tools and would like to share your feedback or would like to find out about more support, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can email me directly or the INE address there as well. But we would love to hear from you and hear about how you are kind of really tackling these critical issues around professional development and peer coaching and follow-up and support in particular. So that's pretty much it from me. A bit of an introduction to the materials, but I'm sure you'll be able to have a look at them in more detail yourself, and we'll have a discussion. And maybe just to say, the last slide, just a photograph from a recent TOT that took place in the Middle East around peer coaching. So we had colleagues from a whole range of organisations working in lots of different contexts to look at these peer coaching resources. And hopefully implementation for a lot of the colleagues will begin beginning right just about now. So we're really excited to be learning about how that implementation goes, and so that'll be quite exciting to follow up with colleagues who attended there, and hopefully we'll be able to do provide similar kinds of support going forward. So a huge thanks to the agencies who organised and led that initiative in the Middle East. But that's everything from me, I think, Natalie. And I'll hand over to our wonderful presenters who will be able to share much more about the implementation and the practicalities of peer coaching. But thanks, everybody, and do get in touch with any questions.
Thanks, Charlotte. Now we'll move over to Danny Falk.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to dive in a bit more on the development of the TIC peer coaching materials and how the pilots, the practicalities of the pilots, as well as the piloting approach, which, as Mary said, was very closely tied to Teachers for Teachers, which I won't speak to too much in the next 10 minutes. But of course, if there are any questions about that, please feel free to pop them in the chat box. So a quick agenda of what I'll hopefully cover in 10 minutes. I'm going to keep myself on time. Again, just a lot of the practicalities of what piloting looks like, and then a good amount of time about the learnings that we gathered from the pilots, as well as the feedback from the teachers participating in the program, the external reviewers, and of course the TIC, and then revisions that we made to finalize the pack, which is now available. And if there's time, a brief update about how we scaled up the peer coaching this last year with about 50 peer coaches in Kakuma through the Teachers for Teachers program. So as Mary mentioned, and Charlotte mentioned as well, we piloted the peer coaching materials in Kakuma refugee camp. And this was also where some of the pilots occurred for the TIC teacher training materials in 2015. And the pilot for the peer coaching materials took place about 1 year after that original pilot in June 2016 and continued throughout the year. We were able to do 4 separate pilots where we worked with 25 peer coaches and 130 teachers at the primary level. And these teachers were primarily refugees, but there were also Kenyan teachers in the program as well. And this reflects the overall demographics of the primary school teaching cadre in Kakuma refugee camp. You can see these statistics are a little low given Kalabay settlement, the new settlement near Kakuma. But the majority of teachers teaching at the primary level are refugees, and there are limited training opportunities for these teachers, especially continuous professional development training opportunities. So we were really happy to pilot the peer coaching materials in Kakuma. So we had 4 separate pilots of the materials, and Charlotte talked about the 2 levels of peer coaching, and we were able to pilot both of these levels of peer coaching over the course of the year between June 2016 and June 2017. We did 3 pilots doing the level 1 peer coaching. So that's peer coaching with just teacher learning circles. And we worked with 21 peer coaches who in turn worked with 102 primary school teachers. And the peer coaching materials were really designed to support the TIC teacher training materials. So all of those teachers and peer coaches went through the introductory training pack. So the 4-day training that spends 1 day on each of the core competencies of the TIC teacher training. After the teachers went through the training, And after we selected peer coaches, which I'll talk a bit about the practicalities of what that looked like in the next slide, the peer coaches conducted teacher learning circles for 2 to 3 months after the training. So this was a much more condensed pilot where we combined the level 1 peer coaching with the 4-day introductory training pack. And we reached over 100 teachers through these pilots. Then for level 2 peer coaching, we did 1 pilot where we worked with 6 peer coaches who in turn worked with 28 primary school teachers. And again, this is majority refugee teachers, but there were also Kenyan teachers as well. And for level 2, these teachers also conducted teacher learning circles, but they, in addition, went and visited the teachers they worked with in their schools and did classroom observations. And this peer coaching model we piloted in tandem with the full TiC modules. So over the course of 10 months, we piloted teachers' role and well-being, pedagogy, curriculum and planning, and child protection, well-being and inclusion, 1 module every 2 to 3 months. And in between each of the modules, there were peer coaching activities happening. So teachers were meeting in TLCs together between those trainings, and peer coaches were visiting teachers in their classrooms to conduct classroom observations. So this comprises of the 2 approaches for how we piloted the materials, as well as how we tried to ensure we were looking at both of the levels and the different teacher training approaches that the TiC had also put together. So what did that actually look like? Because I mean, it sounds really nice, but how did we actually make that happen? So first we selected the peer coach level. And because this was a pilot, we knew we wanted to look at both level 1, which again is just the teacher learning circles, and level 2, which is 1 additional day of training for the peer coaches, where they also learn how to conduct classroom observations. And this was purely for piloting reasons, but also we had the luxury of a lot of time working with the teachers, and we were able to provide that continuous sustained support. So we were very happy to be able to do both. As Charlotte mentioned also, the peer coach profile could look different in many different settings. In the pilot, we chose to work with teachers as peer coaches because from past experience in the camp, we knew teachers were really well positioned to support one another in their professional development. We had had the privilege of working with really committed, really experienced teachers who were also eager to take on the role of being a peer coach. And we knew this because we held focus group discussions with select teachers before the pilots to see even if they thought this was possible, if they would be interested in taking on this type of role, and we got really positive feedback from them. So that also contributed to the selection of a teacher for a peer coach in the pilots. There's guidance in the facilitator's guide around how program implementers can make peer coach selections or can select the peer coach profile that best suits the context in which they're working. So that was just our process and why we chose teachers. And once we knew we were working with teachers, we thought about what criteria we would look for to select the peer coaches. And because Kakuma is a multinational camp, nationality was one of our criteria, as well as gender and years teaching. And because we were working with teachers both in the teacher training using the TiC materials, we were really eager to see how they were engaging with the content of the training as well as with one another in the training settings. So that was a criteria that we looked to in selecting the peer coaches as well. And once we had an initial selection, sorry, I can't talk this morning, we went and visited those teachers in schools and did classroom observations and school visits. And during these classroom observations, if we were able to see teachers teaching, we looked to see if they were using any of the new strategies from the training. But if we didn't get to see them teaching, we were also looking at how they were interacting with one another and their learners. Something equally as important as selecting the peer coaches is establishing really clear expectations for all of the teachers who will participate in the peer coaching activities. And this was a great lesson learned, which I'll go into a little bit in the next slide, from the pilots, that we can't just prepare the peer coaches to carry out the activities. We have to be really clear with the teachers what we expect from them in terms of participating in the peer coach activities. So over the course of the pilots, we learned to do this more and more. And there's great guidance in the TIC full module of teachers' role and well-being on how to do this, especially in terms of teacher learning circles. So I recommend looking at that resource should you be interested in implementing the peer coach training in your context. Finally, in the pilots, we also provided follow-up support to the peer coaches by doing additional workshops, which eventually ended up going into the final materials on adult learning. They were very eager to, the peer coaches were very eager to learn more about how adults learn, and as Charlotte mentioned, that's now a big part of the materials. We also visited teachers and peer coaches in their TLCs, and we encouraged the peer coaches to work with one another and almost have peer coach learning circles. As they were taking on this new role, they were very well placed to support one another in these new activities. So we learned a lot, and I'm not going to be able to go over everything, and this is a fraction of what we learned squeezed onto a slide, but hopefully in the Q&A we can unpack some of this. But one of the key learnings that came out of the pilots in Kakuma was to distribute some of the soft skills that Charlotte had mentioned around supportive communication throughout the training. And this is both for the pace of the training itself, and also so teachers could really apply those soft skills in practice time of facilitating TLCs or conducting classroom observations in the training. And we found this extremely beneficial because we were working with peer coaches who were not as familiar with teacher learning circles. And so even introducing peer coaching in and of itself was a new concept, and then the activities of peer coaching were also new for the teachers. So spending a lot of time on supportive communication without introducing the practicalities of what a TLC looks like became, the training was not grounded in something in which the teachers could apply those skills tangibly. And so that's why we front-loaded a lot of the practicalities of teacher learning circles on day one. And we were really lucky because we had 4 pilots, in that we invited former peer coaches to come and introduce the role and responsibilities of peer coaching to their new peer coaches going through the training. And they did this by modeling TLCs and being available to answer any questions the new teachers going through the peer coach training may have. And inspired from some of these model TLCs is a TLC script within the appendices of the facilitator's guide. So even if you don't have peer coaches to draw on yet in your context and you're interested in using this approach, there's an example script, and we also have videos that we'd be happy to share. Throughout the process, we got a lot of feedback from the teachers, both who were participating in the peer coaching and the peer coaches themselves, which was so vital. It really led us to include more information about adult learning, as well as stronger connections to the TIC teacher training competencies. Of course, we got expert feedback from the TIC and external reviewers as well. And so some of the revisions down at the bottom that you can see, I sort of already mentioned and Charlotte mentioned earlier around guidance for adapting and implementing peer coaching in different contexts, and connecting the TIC teacher training competencies through the peer coaching. So thinking really strategically about how this additional support can continue to help teachers develop the competencies and the skills that they gained in the teacher training. And this last year, I'll very quickly give an update before turning it over to Mary Winters to talk about the work in Iraq with IRC. We were able to scale up the level 1 peer coaching through generous funding from UNHCR and UNICEF Kenya. And we worked with 50 peer coaches who in turn worked with 419 teachers. And this was a very exciting scale up, but perhaps what was even more exciting was seeing the continued work of the peer coaches from the first year and school-based TLCs that were arising because teachers really saw the benefit of collaborating with one another. And we had former peer coaches lead the implementation of both the teacher training and the peer coach training, which further helped contextualize both of those approaches for the teachers working in Kakuma, and we expanded to Kalabeye settlement as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Mary Winters now, but this is my email should anyone want to reach out around Teachers for Teachers or peer coaching, but hopefully we'll get into some more discussion in the Q&A session. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Danny. And yeah, we'll switch over to Mary Winters. And obviously, we're trying to keep the presentations as brief as possible. So lots of details are being left behind, but we can certainly share those during the Q&A. So keep the questions coming in the comments box. Mary, let's turn to you then. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Mary. First of all, thanks for inviting me to share our experiences in Iraq with these materials. I thought today I can just go over the project that we ran, our approach to the project, and then really dive into the peer coaching aspect and talk about how we ran our TLCs for the teacher learning circles as well as the teacher classroom observation, and then just go over some of our lessons learned. So Natalie, just go to the next slide, please. Our project was a partnership between the IRC and between our donor GIZ, as well as we worked with the ministry here. So we were working with the Directorate of Education in Dohuk Governorate, and Dohuk is a governorate in the Kurdish region of Iraq in the north. And so the goal of the project was to build the skills of 3,000 IDP, refugee, and host community teachers in Dohuk to enable teachers to acquire and use learner-centered teaching skills and promote student and teacher social emotional well-being. So thanks, Natalie. The next slide, please. So our approach for the project, we started with a 5-day face-to-face training, which we started in July 2017 and ran through until October, until the start of the school year. And this was based on the TiCC materials. They were contextualized for Iraq, designed specifically for this project. And then after that, throughout the academic school year from November to May, we had our monthly teacher learning circles as well as our bi-monthly teacher classroom observation. And then to finish off the project, we just finished with a 4-day face-to-face refresher training, which started last July and is just finished now in September. Great, and the next slide, please. The participants of our project, so as I said, we worked with the ministry here. So we selected 37 trainers from the Dohuk Teacher Training Institute. And they were trained, they led our Cycle 1 training last summer. And then from those trainers, we then selected 28 trainers to become our mentors. And we selected the strongest trainers. And at that point, we had been working with them for a while, had seen them do multiple iterations of the training. So we selected the strongest trainers to become our mentors. And then they received the peer coaching training that we've been talking about today. And they worked then with our teachers throughout the year. We trained in total 3,851 teachers over the course of this whole project. And thanks, Natalie. The next slide, please. So more on the peer coaching. So I thought I'd go into maybe just some of the more practical logistics of our teacher learning circles. First of all, they were done by school, so each school had its own teacher learning circle. We did have to hold the TLCs during school hours, which obviously is not ideal at all, but we were working in 156 schools, and of those schools, only 2 were operating in a single shift, and like over half had a triple shift, so the timing was just really a challenge. And for the teachers, we would provide the transportation incentive, we would provide refreshments, phone credit for the facilitator and the head teacher, plus a small gift for the facilitator for each session. And this is just really to incentivize the participation and attendance and engagement in our TLCs. And then for the facilitation, it was the mentors that I mentioned. They're the ones that received the peer coaching training, and then they would attend and oversee each of the TLCs. But the facilitator role itself was actually shared by a different teacher from the TLC group each month. So slightly different from what Dani described in her pilot. So we decided to do it this way to really share that opportunity, that leadership opportunity with different teachers. To ensure that there is, lots of female participation, which is often always something that we're emphasizing here in Iraq, and, to share the responsibility in case one of the facilitators was maybe a little weaker. And so to prepare that facilitator, I know it's a really different approach than what's been previously described. So then the mentors would sit with the facilitator for about an hour each week before or an hour each month, before the TLC, and we'll go over the materials and help the facilitator prepare. And then at the end of each TLC session, the teachers would then choose the facilitator collectively and the topic for next month's TLC before the end of the session. And then for the teacher classroom observations, so the mentors were the ones doing the observations. They would do an unannounced visit. They would fill out their teacher classroom observation form. And afterwards, they would have a one-on-one mentoring session with the teacher to go over the lesson. And then that's when they would set goals with the teacher.
Excuse me, Mary, we can't hear you anymore.
I think you're back.
I think you're back. Okay, I'm just going to go on without my video and see if that makes a difference. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. I'm not quite sure where I dropped off, but yeah, I was just talking about the importance of training the mentors well on the teacher classroom observation, looking at testing the inter-rater reliability, making sure they were comfortable with the tool, how to score it, etc. So after we did the first iteration of the teacher classroom observation, we looked at the scores, the average scores, and we broke them down by mentor, each of the 28 mentors, and we saw actually there was a lot of variability in the between the mentors and their scoring. So this is something we then addressed. We recognized we need to do some additional training on this, do some more practice. So we addressed this at our next mentor learning circle, and I think Dani alluded to something similar. We had created also mentor learning circles, which happened 4 times throughout the project, so not quite as frequently as teacher learning circles. And so again, this was to provide support to the mentors as they themselves are going through this process. And then thanks, Natalie. The next slide, please. I thought I'd just talk quickly about some of our lessons learned, the key takeaways. I thought I'd start with a positive one. The teachers really enjoyed the TLCs and found them to be useful. And, Charlotte spoke of the importance, of peer coaching, and we definitely saw this in practice ourselves. Teachers were repeatedly telling us just how valuable they were finding the TLCs, how they're able to apply this in their classroom, really improve their teaching, which is really, really encouraging. And, we saw this too throughout the 3 teacher classroom observations that we did. The first one, we had an average score of 62%. The second had an average score of 74%, and then the final had an average score of 82%. So, we are just starting to dive into the data that we just finished collecting, but, this is definitely promising results. And then across the TLCs, we saw about a 94% average attendance rate, which also we were really pleased with. And then I thought I'd talk about the facilitators for the TLCs. And as I mentioned, this was a rotating role. It was difficult at first to actually get teachers to volunteer. No one really wanted to do it at first because facilitation is not the same as teaching. So the earlier facilitators were perhaps slightly weaker as they kind of grew into the roles and saw more examples. And as the TLCs progressed. And kind of a lesson learned for us is we don't really have a systematic approach for how to prepare those teachers to be facilitators. Like how the mentor goes through that process. So the strength of the facilitator really depends on the level of effort that the mentor put in and the amount of time that the mentor really spends with the teacher, and that can definitely be variable and can result in varying quality of different TLCs. We talked about having one teacher as a facilitator, as Danny discussed. Many of our staff actually said culturally this wouldn't really work very well in Iraq, and it could be a very sensitive issue, and that teachers would be resentful of having to learn from one of their peers or one of their friends. And of course, we wanted to avoid the mentor being the one to lead the TLC. As Charlotte said, this is not hierarchical. It would kind of defeat the whole purpose of peer learning. Really interestingly, though, staff told us, our own staff told us that teachers would take it more seriously if it were being led by the mentor or someone other than one of their peers. Because if it's a peer or a friend, they may not show up or they may come sign in and then leave early. They'll say, oh, it's just my friend. They won't mind. It's easier to, get away with things when, it's your friend rather than it's, someone from the ministry. So I thought that was interesting feedback. We certainly wouldn't move away from having a peer component to this, but I think it's just definitely food for thought for us on how we can best, approach this the next time we have our TLCs. And then lastly, the selection of TLC topics. Our TLCs all have a different topic. We have scripted facilitation guides. So we do go through at the start, celebrate successes, share challenges, brainstorm solutions, but then the teachers get to learn about a new topic each session. And there's 12 different possible topics that they can choose from that are drawn from the TIC material. And they decide as a group what the topic will be. And what we found was that there's actually no correlation, or we didn't really see a strong correlation between the topics that the teachers were collectively choosing and say their post-test scores from the Cycle 1 training or what the mentors were seeing, the performance and the challenges observed in the teacher classroom observation, there's no correlation. So when they were presented with a menu of topics, they perhaps got excited by all these different options, and so they would just choose what they were most interested in. So we're thinking going forward, perhaps we're going to look at the idea of making some of these topics mandatory, or the mentor deciding which ones should be mandatory, and kind of, we'll revisit that approach as well. So that's just very briefly some of our lessons learned, and if people have questions, happy to answer them, and I guess I'll turn it back over to Mary.
Thank you very much, Mary. We do have a number of questions coming in. So I'm trying to kind of group them a little bit, and I'll direct them to some of our speakers, though I know many of you will want to maybe jump in and add to the responses. Charlotte, I'm going to come to you first. There are two for you to tackle, if you don't mind. One is from Benta, who in your opening remarks you talked about establishing a supportive network, and she was curious to hear a little bit more about that and how that actually works in practice, what that might look like. And Fanny asks, to what degree can you use the peer coaching pack without the TIC teacher training pack, and how that might be adapted to other teacher professional development approaches? Would you mind tackling those two for us to kick off the Q&A?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Mary, and thanks for all the great questions. Maybe I'll start with the second question first. I think these the peer coaching resources can be used, I think, with any teacher training program, really. So yeah, it's very flexible. The idea was, I think, there's just so much of these tools that are kind of made at the global level that they can be adapted and should be adapted and contextualized for the needs of the teachers on the ground and the other work that you're involved with. they were designed with the original teacher training pack in mind, and there are definitely points towards that, particularly around, for example, the goal setting, really looks at that competency framework, that they can definitely be used and are being used in other ways. So yeah, please don't feel constrained if you've got your kind of own approach the particular modules you're delivering. I think the concepts around supportive communication and how teacher learning circles work apply in lots of different ways. So yeah, very, very flexible for your needs. But equally, if you are using the teacher training pack, lots of opportunities to make strong connections and really build on that as well. So they can work in both ways. And yeah, that first question about supportive networks, I think this became increasingly important to us during the piloting, because while we had originally, I think, had in mind this idea of the coaching as being important because of the opportunity for professional development and developing skills and learning, it became quite apparent that through that process of having that monthly, if it is monthly, teacher learning circle, really did help foster a supportive network for the teachers. And that's something that, and perhaps Danny can speak to that as well from the time in Kakuma, that these types of collaborative activities, while maybe originally designed to focus on skill development, actually enable teachers who maybe hadn't had the opportunity to come together in those types of forums to spend more time interacting with their colleagues in this way. And so we found that these types of activities really did foster that sort of supportive network. And actually, in some of the learnings from that piloting process, that was something that the teachers hugely valued from it. So as well as being able to work on those skills, being able to collaborate with their colleagues and see their colleagues as a support network was really just as important to them. So I think it's a really important question when we're designing our model around teacher professional development, is thinking how are we making sure that teachers do have those opportunities. And I think teacher learning circles are one, and then it's really important that when we're designing the approach to teacher learning circles, we're thinking about how we're setting those up in a way that will allow that type of interaction. So obviously it will depend on the context, but in some cases that may be if it's school-based or if it's in a particular community and particular area, but how can we set up those learning circles in a way that will allow for that foster wider collaboration in the teacher learning circle, but beyond that as well, which is what we saw in the pilot, was that it was encouraging more of the collaboration outside of the learning circle, outside of the workshop, by fostering those relationships. So a really great question. I'm not sure if I've given enough detail and example if the others want to feed in, but I think it's something that we can think about in the design, but that this approach really lends itself towards.
Great. Thanks, Charlotte. And I'm going to come to Danny and Mary with the next couple questions. And just in the interest of time, let's try to keep our responses short and sweet and as detailed and helpful as possible all at the same time, just so we can try to get through these. So Claudio asked if you trying to tease out the nuance of some of the projects that both of you are working on. A question around, is any part of the training or professional development support conducted online? And if so, could you describe that? And then Tanika is asking about whether peer coaches or the mentors, perhaps on either project, were incentivized in any way. So maybe Danny, let's come to you first, and then Mary, you can pick up the response as well.
Yeah, two really great things that I saw as they were coming in. I was like, oh, I should have mentioned that. So in the piloting in Kakuma, as Mary had mentioned, the program has 3 components, and peer coaching is one of them. And we did have an online component called mobile mentoring, where we connected teachers to educators outside of the camp to continue discussing topics from the training or challenges that they're facing in the classroom. And we also leveraged these online chats to support our peer coaches. So the program team had separate WhatsApp chats with the different groups of peer coaches from across those 4 pilots to troubleshoot any challenges that they may be having and create almost an online TLC discussion. There was no formal training conducted online though, so the WhatsApp connection was really just for targeted support and a place where the peer coaches could ask program staff, Mary, myself, and some of the other team members about how to overcome different challenges they were facing when we weren't on the ground in Kakuma. And in terms of incentives, in our pilot year, we budgeted to incentivize the peer coaches. And for the level 2 peer coaching, which as you may remember had the teacher learning circles and the classroom observations and was extended over a period of 10 months, we gave the peer coaches bikes so that they could travel more easily to different schools. And we also gave the teachers from both pilots, so now the level 1, which was a shorter timeline and just TLCs, and the level 2 peer coaches, a small incentive that was about 20% of their monthly incentive pay from the implementing NGO partner. We realized, though, that this isn't quite sustainable, and in our scale up of the project this last year, we didn't provide incentives to the teachers, or to the peer coaches, I'm sorry. There's guidance around thinking through what the implications of providing an incentive or not providing an incentive are if you're thinking about implementing the peer coaching in your context in the facilitator's guide. So hopefully some of the key questions there will help you think critically about whether it be possible in your program to provide incentives or not.
And then from our side, in Iraq, no part of it was online. It was all implemented by our IRC team here in country. And incentives, yes, we did pay incentives. Our mentors, which, as I mentioned, were from the Directorate of Education, government workers, they were paid a monthly incentive. We were planning to do this, but also in order to use them, the DOE said, insisted that we had to pay them. The amount that was a tricky thing to work out with the DOE. And of course, it's important to have that harmonized, with the government, the cluster, et cetera. For our facilitators that facilitated the TLCs, we did give them just phone credit and a small gift for each session. I would just note that we couldn't have done, it was critical for us to do this with the Directorate of Education to really, for the sustainability of this project, et cetera. It was really key for us to partner with them, and we wouldn't have been able to do it had we not paid the mentors. So that was an important consideration for us.
Great, thank you very much. And Claudio, I know Charlotte posted a comment here and linked you to the case study for Teachers that elaborates quite a bit on the mobile mentoring component, and we'd be happy to talk about that further offline. Helena asked a two-part question around the teacher observations and kind of teachers' reactions to having peer teachers do that. So particularly relevant for you, Danny, and the Teachers for Teachers. We had heard from Mary that proved to be kind of inappropriate or would have had its challenges in the Iraq context, which I think, again, speaks to the guidance that the TIC is putting out about the need to very carefully adapt and make sure that the materials that you're using for professional development have been are culturally appropriate and adapted to the needs on the ground. But Helena is asking about, what were the teachers' reactions to having teachers doing the observation and doing feedback? And then perhaps also for Mary and for for Danny, just the practicalities of carrying out those observations. I mean, in the event that it's a peer teacher, they have their own teaching commitments, how are they able to manage that extra role and responsibility? So maybe Danny, why don't you take that one for now?
Yeah, definitely. And thanks for bringing that up, Helena, because we learned a lot through the piloting of classroom observations, especially with teachers doing classroom observations with their peers. So it was challenging, and the peer coaches did face some resistance from their colleagues. Not every peer coach, but some of the peer coaches faced resistance from their colleagues, perhaps if their colleagues had been teaching for longer periods of time or were just not as comfortable inviting another teacher to come into their classroom. And we tried to think about those reactions, and in both the peer coach training, support the future peer coaches in navigating that resistance with different communication strategies, and again, emphasizing that non-hierarchical approach, that this classroom observation is also an opportunity for me to learn from you and to see what you're doing in your classroom. And also in the teacher training, and again, that's really around the clear expectations for all of the teachers participating in the program, so that they're aware that maybe some of their peers will be coming to see them in their classrooms. Something that was really incredible that came up that was very unexpected was that in the pilot of the level 1 peer coach training, actually throughout all of the 3 pilots, what naturally emerged was that teachers in the TLC were going to visit one another in their classrooms to conduct, we ended up calling them classroom visitations. And there's guidance around this also in the final materials. And this would be non-evaluative, not that the level 2 classroom observations are evaluative, but there's no forms to fill out. It's really going to observe fellow teachers as a learning opportunity. And we saw this come up, as I said, in all of the 3 pilots, and teachers really valued the opportunity to go and see their peers implementing different strategies if something was going really well and they wanted to learn from their colleagues, or inviting their colleagues to come visit them and see something, a strategy they were maybe having challenges implementing in their classroom, and getting advice from their peer after they had seen them in their classroom. So I guess in summary, I think having clear communication both in the teacher training and opportunities in the peer coach training to support the participants think through how to approach resistance is critical, and something we included in the final materials. And in terms of the logistics, yeah, Kakuma is a huge camp. In fact, it's 4 separate camps and almost 200,000 individuals living there. And we felt that the distance was not, or in reflection, we realized we did not consider the distance when dividing the peer coaching groups. And we tried to ameliorate that issue by giving bikes to the peer coaches. But in this, we realized we were not being incredibly gender sensitive because our 2 female peer coaches did not use their bikes. Many women in the camp don't ride around on bicycles. So in the scale up of Teachers for Teachers, we ended up doing school-based, schools within the same area that are walking distance-based TLCs to try to remove that barrier of distance, but it is still a big challenge.
Great. And I just want to jump in for a moment. We are at the hour mark. We're able to stay on for just a few more minutes, and I can pose a couple questions to our presenters. I would also encourage our presenters to look through some of the questions we haven't gotten to yet, and to feel free to post a comment in the comments box, just in an effort to try to respond to everyone. But maybe building on that conversation a little bit, and for both, maybe we'll go to Mary for this one, and Danny as well. But in both, in both approaches, we're thinking about goal setting and supporting teachers to achieve those goals and obviously affect change in their teaching practice. So in what ways do the mentors or the coaches kind of follow that progress of goals, and what does that look like in the respective projects? So maybe Mary, let's hear from you on that one first.
Sure. So for us, the goal setting was done after each teacher classroom observation happened. The mentor would sit down with the teacher, not for very long, about 10 to 15 minutes, and they would go over the lesson together and discuss, successes and challenges, areas for improvement, how they thought the lesson went, things like that. And that's when they would together set a goal based on what had been observed in the lesson. And then this goal would then be reviewed at the next, during the next TCO that they did, and they would reflect on it, set a new goal. So I know that they only got 3 TCO, teacher classroom observations, throughout the whole academic year. So it's not, it's not a super consistent follow-up, but that's the, that's the process that we did during this project.
Great, thank you. And just before people start signing off, I'll just put in the comments box the link to the TIC portion of the INE website, where you can also find all of the open source tools for the teacher training and the peer coaching. And again, feel free to contact any of us if you'd like additional information about our respective projects, and we'll make sure that we're sharing the PowerPoint slides from today's webinar. So just in the last couple minutes, I'm going to quickly answer a couple questions, and then I'm going to come back to Mary and Danny from Heba's question about managing cultural sensitivities in these dynamics between peer coaches and the teacher relationship. So maybe we can end with that. But Claudio, just, yeah, you had an interesting question about, can the whole training be self-managed by teachers independently, or does it always require kind of one of our respective organizations to be involved? I'm not sure that's an easy question to answer. I think we need to pilot that a little bit, and it would probably, in my mind, still require some type of oversight or support. But I know what we saw in the Teachers for Teachers project in Kakuma was this wonderful evolution and shifting of us playing a bit more of a lead role to then more of a background role, where the teachers were very much able to, you know, through their peer coaching or through their continued involvement in the initiative over time, to then become, in fact, the lead trainers and to play an active role in that sense. And now that we've started to phase down the work in Kakuma, you know, seeing how some of those teachers are poised to continue working with local NGOs and be incredible resources to the continued support in that particular context. But that's a great question. Maybe others can chime in on the comments box about that. But why don't we go, yeah, to Mary and to Danny, just kind of a last response here as we begin to close around managing the cultural sensitivities and thinking about culturally appropriate or culturally responsive strategies for managing that in terms of the peer coach or mentor-teacher relationships. Mary, you want to touch on that first, and then we'll go to Danny to close out?
Sure. It's a great question. It's a big question. I'm not sure if I immediately have a fabulous answer for it. I mean, one thing that I did mention earlier was that we recognize that based on the culture here, it wouldn't have been as appropriate to have someone's peer, a friend of theirs, a teacher of theirs, to be leading them the entire time in the TLC, which is part of the reason that we wanted to share that role. So that's one thing that we did. And also it is a little bit different for us than Danny's pilot in that the ones doing the teacher content observations were mentors from the Directorate of Education and not their own peer, you know, not a teacher from their own school doing the observation. So we definitely had some different, you know, avoided a lot of what could have been some challenges around that. I'm sorry, it's a big question. That's kind of all I can think of right now in the moment. Perhaps I can reflect on it some more. See maybe Danny, what you have to say to this question.
Sure. It's a very big and very important question. And I think what immediately came to mind in how we approached the pilots in Kakuma is we tried to take a really participatory approach. And by that I mean at every phase in when we were thinking about what peer coaching could look like and who the peer coaches could be, we went to a group of teachers and got their feedback and asked them if they thought it could work, if we had an idea, or elicited ideas from them in terms of what they would want to see in the peer coaching activities, in terms of what they would want to get out of these activities. And I think really including their voices and perspectives in the design and then throughout the project, throughout the pilot, itself, was really critical to ensure that we could be as culturally sensitive as possible. But Mary, maybe you have some other ideas to add on to that.
I think we could have a whole webinar just on that topic, and unfortunately we're probably going to have to leave it there. But I think, you know, part of mitigating some of those challenges is obviously putting the time in and making sure that the teachers are, you know, have very adequate, if not more than adequate, opportunities to feed into the design, development, and implementation of these projects. And we did that to the best of our ability with Teachers for Teachers, and in some ways had a luxury having time. Danny lived in the camp for a number of months and developed very close relationships with those teachers. But I still think even in lieu of that, we're able to come up with more meaningful opportunities for engagement with teachers, and we all need to make that a priority to make sure we're not only responding to their needs, but that we're doing so in a culturally appropriate and culturally sensitive way. And involving teachers, I think, will go a long way in achieving that goal. But I think at this point we need to stop, sadly, but it's wonderful to see the immense interest in this topic, and I applaud all of your efforts for the support you're providing to teachers and the collective efforts that hopefully will continue to make to elevate the quality of robust and continuous and sustainable teacher professional development. So we'd love to hear from you, from the TIC Collaborative, your ideas about how we can continue to strengthen those responses and our broader collaboration through the INEE network and family. So thank you to INEE for hosting this. Thank you to Charlotte, to Danny, and to Mary for joining us. And we look forward to sharing more exciting updates and resources and tools from the TIC as we move forward. So thank you again. Have a lovely rest of your day wherever in the world you might be. And thanks again for your support. We'll see you soon. Bye.